therefore to look at whether issues such as growth-promoting policies might be more important in some ways than the strictest possible application of the rules. Thank you.
Right. In the Five Presidents report, it was clearly intended as an independent advisory group outside the Commission. Is that a vote of no confidence? I don't think so. I think we've established a fiscal council, like all of the countries have, outside the Ministry of Finance. I haven't experienced that as a vote of no confidence. We still design the budget. We still establish ourselves whether we are inside the rules and the obligations that we have. And yet there is an independent advisory council, also in the Netherlands, which does its own estimate and then tells me, well, maybe you're just off target. Maybe you want to do a little more, or maybe you're well inside target. I think to have that kind of independent assessment helps. I'm very strong in favor of political decision-making in Europe. It is crucial for democratic legitimacy. But you have to distinguish the, let's say, technical assessment and the political decision-making. So ECFIN will still do its work. We will still send our draft, like we have at a national level, an advisory group outside, which sometimes criticizes us, sometimes criticizes the Commission and says, well, the way you're interpreting the rules is very flexible. And that will make sure that we stay sharp and well-tuned to the pact.
And on the aggregate fiscal stance?
I think that was also part of the idea when we wrote the Five Presidents report, that this independent fiscal council would also advise on that.
Mr. President, thank you very much. Dank u wel.
His Dutch is very good.
Well, you know, if you actually were a French minister, probably I wouldn't be sitting here, but Martin Schanta would be here. Thank you. And let's continue discussions during the coffee break.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, actually, there is no coffee break. There is just another panel, so stay tuned for the next panel.
Coffee break, please. Okay. This was not a proper announcement. There is no coffee break. We continue with the next panel. Please. Poďme. Tak poďte sa posadiť vy. No tak zatiaľ budem stať, keď mi donesú stoličku. A kde máme to Iena? Please. Please. Hi. Please.
Where's...
Ivan, poď sem.
I'll move one. There's a fourth one.
Oh, good. Hans. Hans. Okay. Why don't you sit here and I'll sit here? Okay, good.
Just want to make space.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Vladimír Bilčík, and I'll be leading this panel for the next, we've got about 50 minutes, so we actually have a coffee break coming up, and I'm very happy that most of you have decided to stick with us. I've been thinking about how to pitch this panel, and actually last night I had an unexpected visit to the emergency room with my daughter, and while waiting for a doctor outside the ER, she and I were reading a children's book. It's a classic by Marilyn Sadler called It's Not Easy Being a Bunny. And it's about a bunny who basically is not very happy living a life of a bunny. So he tries out a life with 7 different animals, only to discover that actually it's not really a bit about this panel. It's not easy discussing the trio, and it's not easy discussing the EU presidency. But I hope we do come away from this panel. Actually, there is substance and there is some excitement to this. And so I'm very happy that I not only have you here in the audience, but we have a very distinguished set of panelists here. Started with a bit of discussion on the EU presidency and the trio. Let me start from my nearest right. We have Hans Feilbrief. My Dutch is not very. Hans is, I should say, somebody who wasn't supposed to sit on the panel, and my pleasure is even bigger that you're here. Unfortunately, and I have to excuse Ambassador Richard van Rijssen, who was the original person on the panel. Unfortunately, he fell sick, and I hope we all wish him well soon. So very warm welcome to you. Hans is a Treasurer General at the Ministry of Finance in the Netherlands, and is the principal advisor to the Minister on Euro-related matters. And I promise not to be too tough on him, since he's a last-minute replacement on bigger questions. So I'll try to restrain, I promise. On my further right in the middle, we have Ian Borg, who comes from Malta, is the, I understand, the youngest member of the executive in Malta, and is also the parliamentary secretary responsible for the preparation of the EU Council presidency, and is also responsible for EU funds. So very warm welcome to you. And last but certainly not least, on the very home turf, we have Ivan Korčok, who is the state secretary here in Slovakia, and is also the governmental plenipotentiary for the Council presidency of Slovakia in the latter half of next year. Gentlemen, welcome to you, welcome to all of you, and let's kick it off. I hope we can have kind of a snapshot interaction, not quick speeches or long speeches, but rather a discussion. We'll try to lead it here on the panel for the next 25 minutes or so, and then we'll open it up to questions from the audience. My initial question is, and I guess this gets back to my thinking about, how to really pitch this. Why should we care about presidency these days? Why is presidency in the post-Lisbon era still important? Or is it? What would you say to this? And maybe I'll ask here on the spot, Hans from the Netherlands. You've been in the not you personally, but Netherlands in the presidential seat a number of times. Is it still important? And actually, does it actually matter in issues related to EMU, Euro? What relevance do you foresee it'll play in a few weeks' time?
Well, it does a lot. I mean, when we were last president in 2004, we tried to push down the Services Directive. We didn't succeed fully, but we made a long way. And now for the next 6 months, we will try to push further the banking union, the capital markets union, which Jeroen Dijsselbloem pointed out, which is very, very important. So, I mean, well, from a national perspective, you could say you cannot push your own agenda. I mean, it's not about pushing a Dutch agenda, but it's pushing Europe forward. So I would say, yes, indeed, it's very important, and it's also very important that we do it, the three of us, and not alone. So that this is sort of a rolling agenda.
And you think the presidency still plays a role to the extent it can push certain things?
Absolutely. My experience is, having been in the Eurogroup presidency, that we really pushed for things like the banking union. I mean, the banking union wouldn't have been there if there would have been a big push by Jeroen Dijsselbloem, but also by the rolling presidencies then, like Lithuania and Latvia, etc. So yes.
Okay, Malta and Slovakia newcomers. This is going to be the first time, and the first time is always very important. We want to leave a good impression, but also get the job done and capitalize on it in the wider context. How is the thinking in Malta? Is the presidency still important? You kind of lose the limelight. You don't have the prime minister taking the center stage in Brussels. Nonetheless, there is a lot at hand when we look at the tasks which the EU has to deal with.
I think that every rotating presidency leaves its mark somehow. In some way or another. So being also post-Lisbon, we have to take into the equation the European Parliament, and therefore also dealing with the other co-legislator, which is a crucial thing, especially if you are going to preside for the first time. And definitely it's also an opportunity for our public administration, which is doing a lot of work at working group and working party levels. Indeed, the active and also functional. We've been working together with Ivan. We had Peter beforehand, and we believe that it's also important now to step up the communications with the local citizens, which sometimes even not just the man on the street, but between the institutions. And therefore, it's crucial for us not to raise too much the expectations. There's the Commission's work agenda set by the European Council, and our role is quite functional and an operative one. Of course, we don't, in some instances where we need to react to the changes which are ongoing, when it comes to migration. I'm pretty sure that we'll have opportunity to enter into more details of us in the next 18 months.
Yes, you've opened up a very good wider issue of the importance of the presidency, and that's not only Ivan Korčok. Ivan, you've experienced a number of presidencies as Slovakia's permanent representative in Brussels. Losing its importance post-Lisbon, and what is the Slovakia's, in that sense, expectation? What should it be in terms of the kind of outline? How can we sell this package, this position, back at home, that is to the Slovak public, which actually has been one of the publics in the EU when we look at the trends, which on a lot of EU-related issues has had a very optimistic or fairly optimistic outlook. So how to work with this further?
First, back to your original question, which I think was extremely important when you asked whether presidency of the Council still matters. My simple answer is yes, it does. It's my own experience because I had a chance to experience 12 presidencies while I was ambassador back in Brussels. But if Hans, representing Netherlands, who has been holding the presidency for 12 times, says it does matter, then it really is something which is extremely important. But I think this is falling out now. It's working here. Secondly, it does matter for another simple and obvious reason, because presidency is not a presidency of the Union. This is a presidency of the Council, and the Council is one of the three important institutions which are participating in the legislative process, and in no other institution member states can have their share on the legislative process. So I think the presidency provides exactly the instruments how to establish ownership in legislative process. Now, back to your question, Vladimír, how can we sell all this back home? I think there are different perspectives. Certainly, it is a different way of communication for Netherlands to sell it back home, because there is, let me put it very bluntly, there is maybe not such high doses of adrenaline and expectations, because it's not for the first time. In Slovakia, I don't know how about you, Jan, in Malta, I'm not facing so far, I would call it a massive interest coming from society or from media when it comes to the upcoming presidency. But for me, the most striking point, how to explain back home what the presidency is all about, is to tell that after 11 years after we joined European Union, for the first time, we will have to get undressed of our national jersey, and for 6 months, Slovak presidency will have to put in forefront not its own national interest, because that's the essence of presidency, but it will have to run on behalf of 28 member states the common European agenda. And I think it is good for this country to really experience a new sense of responsibility, where a permanent representative, Peter Javorčík, with whom we swapped, for 6 months, he can forget the narrative which I have been using for almost 6 years, where each and every intervention of mine has started with Slovakia would like to say. Forget it for 6 months. And I think this is new experience. This is a very good experience. I know if I were a politician, I would not be very popular if I said, which is really the essence of presidency, and that is to serve the rest of 28 member states within the council, to represent it externally and especially vis-à-vis the rest of the institutions. So it will be very difficult task for us to create a positive narrative about presidency and sell it positively back home.
Okay, we've kind of have a snapshot idea of what the presidency is and also why it matters. Now let's add the other sexy word, and that's the trio to the picture. Why is the trio important? We had trio even back before Lisbon was in place. It started out, so this is not a new thing. But certainly the ambition today of the Netherlands, Malta and Slovakia, also being three countries in Schengen, in Eurozone, is to use the trio and utilize the trio in a slightly different way than thus far. So my question is, and maybe I'll start with Ian here, what, in your view, since you're the last one, not you, but Malta is the last one in the trio. What does this trio exercise mean for you in terms of the preparation for the presidency itself and for this role of taking the European head on and taking off the national head while you're in Brussels, but also in Malta in the early half of 2017?
I think it was a good learning curve in the past year and a half, especially when trio meetings were taking place in our three capitals, and together with the Council Secretariat, we were basically, first of all, we will be in an 18-month period where this legislature will start to reap the fruits of the legislative process, because most of the dossiers will be at a mature stage and hopefully closed off, and therefore this is not we will not face the difficulty, for instance, that our Italian friends had to face, because you had a new parliament, new commission, so on and so forth. So basically this will really engage in the legislative process, and we will be very busy also with some midterm reviews in particular, and therefore we will be inundated with trialogues also later on, and therefore the work we did in the past, where for the first time, it's important to mention, we decided to be in sync with the other institutions and be more focused. Those of you in the hall which are used to receive trio programs of the trio presidencies basically know that it's about over 100-page document. It speaks about everything. It speaks about the EMU, but it also speaks about nutrition legislation, about obesity, about sports, about
so are we going to have something different this time?
Yes, we decided by the European Council back in June 2014, five issues decided by our leaders, by our head of states, and therefore be more for the due importance to working parties, all the working parties taking place. But we have our focus according to what was and this gives us the flexibility to work on the completion of the single market, the digital aspect in that regards, migration, the new migration, our neighborhood policy, which should be now revamped, because it's not what we desired when the neighborhood policy was enacted back in 2004. Now we have basically a ring of fire rather than having a healthy neighborhood, and therefore this is.
But what can the trio do in the neighborhood policy? I mean, this is external relations, which basically after the role of the presidency here.
True, but I think that, as already mentioned also in the previous panels, I think that also a political one in the sense that, of course, it appreciates that it has to work with the other institutions and understands of government intentions are, because this is not a federal union, this is a union of member states. And therefore, I think that the hard work and the very good work being done by the High Rep Mogherini is being much appreciated by the ministers for foreign affairs, and there's a good working relationship at that level. But of course, we have to address this instability. And for instance, for us, it will be an occasion to once again put on the agenda also in the informal aspect of the presidency, that is what we do in our capital, in the non-decision binding meetings, in our case on the Mediterranean region, the southern Mediterranean, because I think also with migration being one of the consequence challenge we all face today, everybody appreciates that peace and stability in the southern neighborhood is not something which only Malta, Italy, or Greece would like to see, but the whole continent, because it's crucial for everyone to have Libya back on its feet, and also try to reach other positive results in the rest of the north of Africa.
Great. I think we kind of got a sense of the Maltese stamp on the trio and maybe some of the key issues you also want to highlight in terms of your communication, which is very important. You mentioned something which is the union is the union of states. But of course, we have the institutions, and we also have various degree of integration of those states. One of the things which, as I did say, binds the zone. Let me ask Hans here: what does this actually? What could this mean for the work program and also actual progress, where we actually have the three countries inside the club of the common currency? So how can we actually use this, and perhaps opportunity for maybe more continuity and some strategy inside the Eurozone?
I think one of the big issues would be the deposit insurance system, which is of course 28 wide. But it would be great if the Commission indeed comes with a proposal in this year or next year, and we start talking in the Council about this. It would be very good if the Slovak presidency can take over, and that it could be finished off by the Maltese presidency. I mean, this is an obvious example of a trio which can work together and prepare sort of the end stage, and not starting all over again. So I think this would be a very concrete example of working together, which springs into my mind from my own work.
Okay. Ivan, please.
Well, to the same question, can I be very open and blunt?
Yes.
My concern when it comes to trio's role and how to move forward the reform agenda for Eurozone, I'm not concerned really at all about what the presidents, what the three presidencies should be doing. That would be too easy. My problem is that there is a lacking readiness to really make decisive steps forward. Secondly, those decisive steps forward, which are indicated in the five presidents report, where one of the co-authors was President Dijsselbloem, are absolutely needed. But there is no debate on highest political level how to make those bold steps. Can I say very bluntly that during the Eurozone crisis, major revolutionary steps forward to stabilize Eurozone and create systemic instruments were done once we were driven by markets and by market pressure and by the crisis as such. Let us not be misled by the fact that we were given by the markets in the Eurozone, more or less, if we take out Greece and recent experience with them. Let us not be misled. We were rather given a timeout by the markets when it comes to whole stability of Eurozone. But there is the same need to make bold steps as we have seen under the peak of the crisis. And the problem, Hans, is not the Vice President's report. The problem is not what the trio will do. The problem is that there is no debate on the highest political level. How are we going to agree on most important steps that are needed to stabilize in a long-term perspective? So, you know, we have had 2010, help me if I'm correct or not, we had equally a report presented by President Van Rompuy, which was equally good. Now we have repacked it. Now it has a name of 5 Presidents' report. But I'm asking, where is the leadership to move the things forward? I'd be absolutely delighted, Hans and Jan, if we could cooperate in concrete legislative steps that will move ahead. But I dare say here, nothing will move unless we will be unless we are given a clear political guidance to go in that direction, of which we know will not be possible unless we share more sovereignty between member states and common institutions. So my problem, complacency in this area and a bit lacking leadership.
So maybe,
I can say
yes,
something
please.
that is because I mean, I think that June Dijsselbloem just tried to outline that one of the first preconditions for all this to make giant steps forward, which are necessary, is that we need our peoples in. I mean, we cannot go on technocratically pushing out the Union and the Eurozone and not involve our populations. So, I mean, this plea for leadership is all fine, and I like it, and I think it's necessary. But leadership now involves involving people. It doesn't mean that you sort of preach from the council and tell people this is the way we should go forward. So that would be my first answer to Ivan. I fully agree with the goal, but I think that is the kind of leadership we would need. And the second thing is, to be honest, my own experience in the banking union has been, Ivan, that you may have very sort of big concepts, but the reality on the ground is that you have to work very, very hard. I mean, I've spent 20 hours in a row in European Parliament on the SRM, on making the resolution mechanism, 20 hours of negotiations. So that's the kind of work you need to do when being a president. I think we're able and willing to do that. You're able to, the Maltese are able to, and I think that's sort of the value of the trio. But you're absolutely right. I mean, you need a perspective. But the kind of leadership we need, I'm totally convinced that it should be, well, I don't want to be very popular, but it should be inclusive leadership. So it should be leadership which is based on what people want. In my own country, the skepticism about Europe is very high. I think it's here the same. So we need to involve our people who want to go forward, otherwise it won't work.
Okay, I think the sense I'm getting out of this is that in terms of politics and political issues, certainly this is not going to be, and in some respects hasn't been, business as usual for some time. And that's, of course, perhaps a real qualitative change also in terms of what the presidency and the trio can achieve. We have a little over 20 minutes to go, and I'd like to open it up because we touched the political issue and the people, to the people and the audience here. Let's try to take maybe 1 or 2 or 3 questions a series, and if you can be as specific and direct a question to a specific person, that's great. If you have a comment, please try to be fairly brief and also targeted. Who is going to pick it up? It's always hard to break the ice. Nobody?
We sold it.
All right.
I think.
I'm not sure what this tells me about my bunny question initially.
No, there's somebody here.
There is somebody here. Okay. The mic is coming, please.
Thank you, Ivan, to you. So I understood you told us you want to work together. Yeah, and that this is needed, and that there are some programs which are ongoing. What I still don't get is what is special in the presidency and why we need you three to work together. What do you actually change?
Well, I can. What was it to me? I mean,
Because I know you, yes.
yes.
Others can pick it up too.
You know me. Can I say what he is? He's a good friend and chairman of Východoslovenské elektrárne, Tomáš Hejtman. No, look, why this is needed, that we three of us, not only that we are sitting here by coincidence, but that there is this idea of trio, Tomáš. It is very simple, you know. One of the tasks for presidency is to run the legislative process. And everybody knows to conclude from legislative proposal to legislation that takes a lot of time in European Union. So therefore you need to establish certain continuity over time which is longer than 6 months, because if any presidency within 6 months would start to follow its own path, you would get nowhere, basically. So the first fundamental intention is to extend continuity, in this case for 18 months. Of course, you could ask, why couldn't we have presidency for 12? The turn for any member state would come once in 24 years. How can we once in 24 years then talk about ownership that a country wants? Continuity issue for me is extremely important. Then there are other issues, how to establish continuity, certain continuity between the two following trios. We in Slovakia, we are already talking also with the following presidency coming after Slovakia, Malta and Netherlands. But this is it. But a lot, I think, will depend on how our Dutch friends will kick off pragmatically, because for them, I hope the trio is not ending at the moment when they're starting their national presidency, which is January 1st. And I know realistically what will be in the forefront of your efforts is your own national Dutch presidency. But may I invite you to look a little bit beyond the horizon of your 6 months and stick to what we have, I think, successfully started, to identify the areas where we could get three of us a bit more, as if we went just individually for 6 months, targets, if you want.
Mm-hmm. We have more questions. Joseph?
We can
Up front, please. Yep, here.
You got two now.
All right. Joseph Batora, Comenius University, Department of Political Science. Now, obviously, the idea of the three presidencies working together is indeed a good one, because one presidency in 6 months cannot achieve much. Coordination is really important over a longer period of time. The question, of course, is these three countries are Eurozone member countries, and the kind of debate we're having about the developments in the EU right now is how do we keep all this together? Now, the kinds of proposals that are on the table within the Eurozone about the deepening of integration in the Eurozone, that's all fine. But we also need to make sure that these presidencies keep the EU together as a positive project. So how do you guys think about the involvement of non-Eurozone countries in the development of the institutional infrastructure of the Eurozone? Okay.
Hans, please.
Yeah, I think what's in the forefront, it's a very good question, because what's in the forefront of our minds is, of course, that we face a certain country which will have a referendum on being in the Union or not. So that's very important for us. So we will, having the Eurozone presidency and the ECOFIN presidency, we will do our utmost just to let the integration of the Eurozone go along with trying to involve the outs. And that's, of course, a big issue for us, and I think it's shared by my colleagues on the stage here, that we want to work on this, and we will work very concretely on this. So we will try to involve the outs as much as possible in the Eurozone discussion. Actually, when we're talking, Ivan knows, he's been there, when we're talking about the 5 Presidents report, we're not talking about this in the Eurogroup. We're doing this in ECOFIN.
Right.
So this is sort of a sign that it's also important for them.
Joseph actually raised the issue of a possible Brexit, and we'll have the UK Minister for Europe speaking after coffee break. So I'm very grateful, but I think this is a very pertinent question. How do we keep it all together? And the relationship between the ins and outs is one of the key ones. Ivan, you wanted to react quickly?
Yes, from our own national perspective, I think it is key to really undertake and try everything to avoid a divide between the ins and the outists, because I learned in England 2 weeks ago that the camp of those who are advocating outs, they used to refer to them as to outies. So between ins and outs. Why is it Slovak interest? Let me say it very bluntly too, having Czech friends in the audience. The Slovak interest is to have Visegrad as soon as we can in the Eurozone. This is Slovak interest. Why shouldn't I say that? In order to get it, we in Slovakia, we have to really do everything what we can that the rest, I mean, in Visegrad, which is not in, will not get a feeling that they're subject of our decisions that we take within the Eurozone, but heavily impact on them. Because no doubt what we are doing while deepening, Eurozone, while banking union, it does have impact on internal market. And therefore, I totally understand British friends when they say we have to resolve this, because they are proponents of a very strong internal market, but in no way it must happen that this is to the detriment of those who are not there. At the same time, Hans, may I say, they must not have a veto over what is needed to be done on the level of Eurozone to make it more stable. So we have to find a solution, which, that's my point, is extremely important for Slovakia. And if we can do something as a trio for that, to establish a reassurance for those who are not yet there, that they should not be afraid of what we are doing, that will not be to the detriment of their interests, I think it would be excellent achievement.
Of course, that's one view how to approach the issue, and fairly positive and optimistic. We all know at the same time Eurozone enlargement is not in the cards anytime soon. And of course, the debate is rather driven by other issues, such as how to keep the separation firmer without imposing costs on those who are out. That's certainly the British line. Ian, what's the debate like in Malta on this? Of course, Malta is a bit of a different story, because you had a much bigger internal debate on the very membership in the European Union before you joined, but you did join the Euro even before we did. So what's the view on Malta, if I can put it a bit more specifically, on the whole Brexit issue?
Yes, and even though membership was heatedly debated, Malta now European parliamentary elections, and therefore,
unlike Slovakia, we are the last ones,
and therefore now the Maltese population is in the EU, and therefore that's not an issue any longer. Actually, political parties or EU member state, that is Malta, and when it comes to Brexit, of course, last year we celebrated our 50th anniversary together with the UK since our independence. And whilst Europe is important for the UK, I think we have to admit that also the UK is important for the European project. And therefore, whilst we would like to see this issue resolved positively by the UK population. Of course, we should not rush into starting to mention things like treaty changes, so on and so forth, because I think that this can even scare even further our citizens. I mean, I've been impressed in the past year and a half speaking to the Dutch colleagues about scepticism in a founding member state. But look at the Netherlands. They are approaching it in a more pragmatic way, like involving, proposing to involve more the national parliaments when it comes to legislation, and therefore deciding what can be decided at national level, and then of course discuss shared competences at EU level. And I'm pretty sure that if we communicate all together the importance of this European project, it is still very relevant in 2015, and definitely, whilst not at any cost, but we all do hope that the UK will remain, of course, part of this union.
We all hope, but I guess we also have to get ready for the unexpected, and maybe that's also one of the tasks of the trio. We can get to that, but this issue is finally catching some attention. We have several hands up. Let's take the gentleman in the back, and then Mr. Taylor here. Let's take 2 questions, please. Yes.
Charles Tannock, and I particularly wanted to direct my question at the Maltese representative, because one of the big nebulous myths being spun by those who wish for the United Kingdom to leave the European Union is this concept of the Anglosphere, which is basically the Commonwealth and the United States. And Malta is unique in the European Union, along with Cyprus, as being Commonwealth countries as well as EU member states. And it could be, possibly, that during the Slovak presidency we'll be right in the middle of the Brexit campaign. And my challenge to Mr. Muscat, who was an MEP colleague, by the way, another example of an MEP who's now Prime Minister, is to simply say, will the leadership of your country, who, as was said before, went through a Eurosceptic split between the Labour and the more Conservatives, come out firmly in saying it's in Maltese and Commonwealth interests for Britain to stay in the European Union, and that this kind of Anglosphere concept is really just a complete myth. There's no such thing, and that really Malta, and you do have quite a large diaspora community in the United Kingdom who will be entitled to vote on Brexit, unlike Slovaks and Poles and others. Your people, your citizens living in the United Kingdom will be able to vote. So my appeal to all Commonwealth leaders right now is to rubbish this whole Anglosphere concept, because you know better than most.
Thank you. This is really getting us on that tricky line in terms of management, the EU business and the national questions. But those are real things, so I'll get it back to you. But let me take the question here, and then we'll kick it back to the panel.
Following on, amen to rubbishing the Anglos discussion. Do you think it would do any harm if the United Kingdom wanted it to multi-currency union? Because some people think it's just a form of words and it's a recognition of reality, since there are 2 member states at least that have permanent derogations from the euro. Others fear that it might encourage some of your neighbors, I think of Poland in particular, to want to unwind its treaty commitment to join the euro. Thank you.
Great. This is a very pertinent question also to the presidency, because we get to the nitty-gritty of wording and negotiations. Do we have any more questions at this point? Yes, please. Let's take another one and then we'll get it back to the panelists. There's a lady at the front, please. Microphone.
Thank you. My question is about factor of unexpected, because in every presidency there is a crisis, bigger or a smaller one, that causes, let's say, a shift of the agenda of the presidency, and that could lead for some issues in the agenda having to be tackled by the next presidency and the one to follow. So coordination is needed, as you said. But how can you, let's say, prepare for this short crisis? And my second question is to Mr. Korčok. We have a special case with Slovakia having national elections just before you assume your presidency. And people sometimes make the difference. And is that an additional fact that you have to coordinate in the domestic scene with other parties before the election so that you can have a successful outcome of the election? Thank you.
Thank you. Excellent questions, both related to presidency and the domestic context. Let's start with Hans, if I may say so, and try to tackle 2 issues maybe. One is the multi-currency union, and the second one is how do you get ready for the unexpected, which of course the Dutch have had some experience with.
Yep. On the multi-currency, you know, I'm a guest. I'm not going to negotiate about this on the stage. On the unexpected, how do you expect it? But the only thing I can say about this is that indeed the fact that you're trying to work together with your colleagues in the coming 1.5 years does help. That we also have the Eurozone presidency, so we do have some ways of dealing with this. But I mean, if you look at, for example, the migrant crisis, well, I don't think the Luxembourg presidency actually prepared for that. And if we would get, to go back to the other 2 gentlemen, if we would get a serious